What's the power of permaculture?
Well, I think the power of permaculture has been in some ways inspirational, giving people hope that we can actually live by nature's rules in a way that actually reinforces nature but provides for our own needs. So that's perhaps a different message that has come than the one that's come from the environment movement generally, that everything we do in nature is damaging and we must somehow restrict and contain ourselves to minimise that damage. You know, permaculture is much more empowering, positive idea that we are actually have a place in nature and we can gain our living, our livelihood directly or indirectly from those working relationships with nature. So some of that's been at that sort of inspirational level, but for a lot of people, particular permaculture techniques and methods that have been popularised in permaculture have been a way of connecting back into this way of working with natural systems and working by the rules of natural systems. And it might start with something like mulching, it might start with other techniques of ecological gardening, it might start with natural building, many different methods and tools that connect to what people are interested in. So in a lot of ways permaculture has provided this great sort of repertoire, a toolbox. So that's been another power of permaculture. But I think the deepest power is the conceptual framework to try and redesign the whole of our thinking and the whole of everything we do in society around the principles of natural systems. So the power is at different levels, and that's different for different people.
What's your estimation for the future of this Earth? Can you still be optimistic?
It is very hard to be optimistic when you have access to all the information about the state of the world and the hard realities of resource decline and still escalating human need. And that escalating human need is not so much to do with population increase, but escalating neediness of the billion or so middle class people on the planet who are finding themselves somehow in need of more and more resources constantly rather than less. So it's hard to feel optimistic about that larger state, but I think the balance to that is that we are clearly, in a human evolutionary sense, in a tip-over point where old systems, old ways of doing things are clearly going to be swept away by history, absolutely. And there will be, quite possibly as there is in the world at the moment, pain and suffering from that process. But there's also emergent possibilities of new rebirth, transformation, dealing with old ancient problems, and I think we are on the point of transformations in not only the ancient war against nature, which is arguably at least 6,000 years old, if not longer, the war between the tribes, which is really in its dysfunctional form is of a similar age, and the war between the genders, that really we have to deal with all of these at once. We don't have any choice now, so the resource constraints and the state of the world will actually require that transformation, and that is an evolutionary leap. So that's sort of looking at it in the macro sense, but also I am optimistic when I see the amazing power of quite simple solutions, that some of the problems we appear to face that seem so intractable are actually remarkably easy to solve, and a lot of them are actually by changing ourselves, or taking away the destructive processes that are stopping people just provide for their own needs in simple ways. I think it's always a seesaw between optimism and pessimism, and I don't think that is just the macro situation looks pessimistic and the micro, when you connect with positive things that are happening in the world, that looks very positive and rosy. I think it's, there's always the positive and the negative close up, and the positive and the negative is possible to see at the large scale as well.
Do you consider cities as a livable system for the future, or do you think everybody has to move out into the countryside and start growing their food?
Well, I am always cautious about when we say everybody, because one of the characteristics of this future world of, which I call this energy descent world, of continuing less and less resources available for many generations into the future, will require that we have very, very diverse and divergent solutions rather than single mass solutions. So anything that involves everybody doing something is likely to be a bad choice. But the ruralisation process is an energetic inevitability. But I would see that ruralisation in two ways. Not primarily from migration from cities to country, though that process will eventually start occurring, reversing this historic trend of migration into cities. And you could say that the seeds of that in the back to the land movements and people wanting to connect to rural environments, the seed of that has been in industrial culture almost from the 19th century. There have been these ideas about returning to nature, living in a more natural environment. In some ways, the suburbs are a dysfunctional expression of that idea to be in the countryside. So I think that will continue to strengthen and will become an urgency in the more immediate future that will affect even government policies. They'll look at how do we redistribute population to where the natural resources are. But more significantly, perhaps, there's also the ruralisation of existing cities. That cities, except the extremely dense ones, do have an enormous amount of open space in them. And that open green space is largely, in most cities now, not used for food production. But in the past, it was used for food production, and we know that cities are capable of supplying most of their own fresh food needs, perishable food. So you can think of that as a ruralisation of cities, and we can also think of that as smaller communities forming within larger metropolitan cities. So instead of so much of the city life being a large-scale mobile network structure, that it becomes, if you like, village life recondenses within this city framework. But saying that, I think cities present some very, very difficult design problems, especially high-density cities, to retrofit them, to redesign them. And it is particularly difficult because until you get collective societal consensus, or at least at the political levels, it's often hard for individuals and small groups to move very far in that direction in a dense urban environment. Whereas in a rural environment, there is more freedom to experiment and provide models, and so consequently we see a lot of the innovative models relating to permaculture actually occur in a rural environment.